Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Alec Slatke. I'm with AAA Northeast here in Hamden, Connecticut, and I'm excited to welcome everyone to the first of our teen driving series of webinars, which is really for parents of teen drivers and prospective teen drivers, and really anyone who cares about the safety of teen drivers. And the answer is everyone should care about the safety of teen drivers, because if you're on the road, there are teen drivers on the road and they affect you, and they certainly affect themselves and their families. So we're delighted to be joined by two really fantastic panelists, Pam Fisher and Bill Van Tassel. Pam Fisher is the Senior Director of External Engagement for the Governor's Highway Safety Association, GHSA. I got it eventually. And she's been with GHSA. Before that, she was a consultant. She actually had a 20-year career with AAA, and so we love her at AAA. She worked for the state of New Jersey. So she's had a long career in traffic safety, and we're just delighted to have her. And keeping the AAA theme going, we've got Dr. Bill Van Tassel, who is the Manager of Driver Training Operations for AAA National, and has been in that role for over 15 years. He also currently serves as the President of the American Driver and Traffic Safety Education Association, ADSTCA. I think I got that one. So a couple mouthfuls, a couple of abbreviations. But I don't want to take up too much time. I want to get to the presentations, and we'll just kick it off by saying this is really an introduction to teen driving and how parents should think about their relationships with their teens and what they should be doing related to teen driving. And we know passenger restrictions, things like that with graduated driver's licensing are very important. And there's also larger emotional issues, interpersonal issues, so lots of things to talk about. And without further ado, I want to turn it over to Pam Fisher to give us a little presentation to kick us off.
Great, thanks Alex, and thanks for having me. It's always nice to be back with my friends at AAA. Bill, it's good to see you. I know you're down in Florida, I'm up in New Jersey, so it's great to be with you all. I'm going to just take a few minutes and kind of do the primer. I'm going to set things up, and then I'm going to toss it off to Bill to talk a little bit more in depth about some areas that parents can really focus on with their teens when it comes to in-car work. But I want to talk about graduated driver's licensing systems or programs. You probably heard, hopefully you've heard the term, and we're going to talk about that in a minute, but it's not new. It's been around for a long time. In fact, it actually got its start in Canada, Australia, the UK, came over to the United States, and the first state that adopted a graduated driver's license system was Florida back in 1996. And it slowly evolved from there. And when we think about the AAA Northeast service area, we think about Massachusetts, New Hampshire, Rhode Island. They came on board around the late 1990s. New Jersey passed its GDL law back in 1998, actually worked on that law. It took effect in 2001. Connecticut started in 2004, and New York had kind of some pieces of graduated driver's license back in the 90s, but they didn't really adopt a system, if you will, back until 2003. So every state in the country has a graduated driver's licensing system, and it's codified in state law. So it is part of the laws that you must follow to get a driver's license. And I want to go back to maybe this is the first time you've heard the term graduated driver's license or GDL, and it doesn't surprise me. If I were sitting in a room with all of you and I was talking to parents and I asked how many of you had heard the term, I'd probably get maybe a few head nods, but probably a lot of blank stares. And that's pretty common, because GDL was not something that was around when we were learning to drive. This is still a relatively new program when you think about how licensing has evolved over many years. But the good news is that it is adopted in all 50 states. And the key thing I want you to know is it's a three-step process. It's a three-step process designed to bring your teens into the licensing system, expose them to driving, but do it in a way that helps to minimize those things that cause the greatest risk for teens. So let's go to the next slide, and I want to talk a little bit more about why this is so important. what does the data tell us? And I don't want to bore you with a lot of numbers, but when we look at the 2018 fatal crash data for the United States and we drill down into the teens, we know about 2,500 teens between 13 and 19 years of age died in motor vehicle crashes in our country. When we look at how that compares to, say, back in the 70s versus, the past few years, it's down almost 75% since 1975, and it's actually down 10% from 2017 to 2018. But here's the thing: two out of every three teen killed in car crashes were males. And I say this often, and people kind of chuckle, but it's often males behaving badly. Males are more likely to be involved in car crashes than females, I'm afraid. But one of the things we have noticed is with the numbers coming down, that we're seeing more significant drops for males than we are for female teen drivers. So here's the other thing: teens are less likely to drive than all the other groups on the road except for older drivers. But when you look at their crash risk, they have a crash rate that's 3 times higher than any other age group out there. So they have real issues when it comes to what's happening out there on the road. And their highest crash risk is at 16 and 17 years of age, right when we're starting this driving process. So there's been a lot of research done on graduated driver's licensing, and we know that right now it is the most effective tool we have in the toolbox for helping our teens get through these dangerous driving years. And as you can see from the graph, particularly from 2000, the late 2000s coming down, we saw some pretty significant drops. And that's where we really started to see GDL really come into play. A lot of laws were strengthened, improvements were made, and there was a lot more education done on how graduated driver's licensing works. I want to ask you to click for me again real quick. There's going to be one other image that pops up on this slide. So let's click the slide, and you'll see this box. This comes from the Centers for Disease Control. And you see the #1 cause of death for 16 to 20-year-olds is what we refer to as unintentional injury. That includes car crashes. So it is the leading cause of death for teenagers in almost every state in the country. And I want parents to understand that. GDL is not an arbitrary system. It was designed to help address this problem and to really bring the numbers down. So next slide, please. So here's the thing. I don't want people to think teens are bad drivers. Teens aren't bad drivers. They're inexperienced, and they're dealing with biological issues. And in this case, we're talking about brain development. So the frontal cortex of the brain, which is where we get that stuff that deals with risk assessment and making good decisions, doesn't fully develop until probably our mid-20s. So while teens are out there on the road, in their 16, 17, 18, 19-year-old, that age frame, they're less risk adverse. So they're more likely to experiment and try things and not to recognize those risky situations. So that's a factor. But I also think the other thing that's important to understand is personality. Personality really can also impact it. So if you have a teen that does like to experiment, that doesn't necessarily see things as unsafe or inappropriate, or easily succumbs to peer pressure, there's a good chance they're going to be more likely to be involved in a crash. So here's the caution I have for parents, that you want to think about your teen's maturity and readiness to drive. Don't get bogged down in, well, the state says, it's now okay for my teen to get a permit or get a driver's license. Only you really know when your teen has that maturity and that sensibility to really go out and start doing this. So I want parents to think about this. I also want them to understand that, while many teens crash because of risk taking, most crashes for this age group are related to inexperience. It's really about making decisions and recognizing, what's going on, recognizing hazards and being perceptive to that. So they make, bad decisions about, speed. They're driving too fast for conditions, or they may not recognize that they're not seeing things out there. We call that inadequate surveillance. So there's issues that are at play, and Bill's going to talk more about the practice phase and how we can help our teens a little bit later. So let's go to the next slide. I want to take a minute and just introduce you to the 3-step system if you're not familiar with it. There's a learner's permit phase. We call it the intermediate license phase, where teens are now allowed to go out and drive independently. And then it goes to step 3, which is full licensure. And depending upon what state you live in, the nomenclature may be a little bit different. New York, for instance, refers to a junior permit or a junior license. In New Jersey, where I'm based, we call the intermediate license a probationary license. Some states call it provisional. So I want you to understand that there are minimum holding periods, as you can see on the slide. Traditionally, it's at least 6 months for the permit. It's another 6 to 12 months for the that intermediate stage before they can actually get full licensure. New Jersey's unique. They have the oldest independent licensing age in the country. We don't license until 17 in that intermediate phase. So you get your permit at 16, but you can't actually go take your driving test until you're 17. And we know that time is critical here. The longer we can wait to allow that brain to mature and to get more experience, the better. So time is definitely our friend in this case. I think it's really, really important. I also want to stress that all states except 4, including New Jersey, this is one of the things I'm not terribly proud of, require teens to log a minimum number of supervised practice hours in the learner's permit phase. And again, Bill's going to talk about practice and how important it is. And the 2 provisions or restrictions I just want to spend a minute on are in that intermediate phase, and that is no late night driving and no or limited teen passengers. And a couple things here. We know that driving at night is risky for everybody, but it's particularly risky for teen drivers. And many teen crashes happen after dark, often between 9 and midnight. So think about what is that, quote, curfew for your teenager, and as they enter that time where they can drive without supervision in that early licensure stage, think about gradually easing them into driving at night. Make sure they have lots of practice. I know when my son got his license in New Jersey at 17, for the first 6 months, we didn't let him drive late at night. We didn't let him drive after 10 o'clock at night. Our curfew was 11. We said, no, you're not ready for this. You had to work up to it. So that's really, really important. The other thing I want to mention is passengers. I can't overstate the importance of thinking about passengers as a distraction. As parents, we may think, oh, wow, my teen's finally licensed. I don't have to carpool. I don't have to deal with that anymore. But we know when you put a teen behind the wheel and you put another teen in the car with them, a friend, a sibling, the crash risk goes up 50%. And it continues to go up the more passengers you put in the car. So those 2 provisions in that GDL program, nighttime driving, passenger restrictions, are really important and get to some of the real significant things that we know are happening and causing risk for teens out there on the road. So I really, really caution parents to think about those, hold the line on those based on your state laws. Really think about that. And again, it's not just cell phones that are distracting, but passengers in that car can really make a big difference. So I want folks to think about that. Let's go to the next slide, and I want to touch on 2 other things related that are kind of unique provisions for a couple of states in the Northeast, AAA Northeast service area. Parent education and decals. And for those parents who are with us today, you are getting educated by being with us, and we thank you for that. You are critical. You are the first line of defense when it comes to what happens with your teen out there on the road. So we commend you. But 2 states, Connecticut and Massachusetts, require parents as part of the licensing their GDL programs to go through an education program, to learn about GDL, to learn about the risk for their teens. So if you're in those states and you haven't done this yet, these are great programs. I ask you to go in there with a very open mind saying, wow, this is good. This is going to help me help my teen, and not from the standpoint of, ugh, I'm missing my favorite TV show tonight because I got to do this. I mean, this is really, really important. New Jersey has a parent, what we call an orientation or education program. It's called Share the Keys. I'm proud to say that I was part of the team that worked on this back in the previous decade, but it's not mandatory. We've been trying to pass some legislation, but you can get it through some of the schools in our state. And I would encourage folks to check out sharethekeys.com. And some of the high schools in our state actually require teens with a parent to go through the orientation program in order to get parking privileges on campus. So we think this is really terrific, and we encourage other states to think about that. So here's the thing. Parents, GDL is your program. It's designed for you. It's designed to give you those minimum standards that you want to seek to exceed. right? It gives you that guidance you need to help your teens survive what I refer to as the most dangerous driving years for teens on the road. So I'm asking you to learn more about your GDL laws. Go to your DMV website, go to AAA Northeast website. They have links to this information, and learn all you can about GDL and leverage it for all it's worth. The other thing I want to point out, you see the license plate on the screen. New Jersey is the only state in the nation that has a decal requirement. So when a teen is in either the permit or the intermediate license phase, they're required to display that little red decal you see on the front and rear license plate of the vehicle when they're driving. And it's there to help law enforcement identify who our GDL holders are. We've heard across the country, we've heard from law enforcement say it's very difficult to enforce the provisions of the graduated driver's license law because we don't know who the teen drivers are that are holding these licenses. So we put this in place 10 years ago. It's referred to as Kylie's Law, and unfortunately it's named after a young lady who was killed in a teen driving crash. And it's really designed to help law enforcement officials enforce those provisions. But remember, GDL enforcement starts at home. So it really starts with parents, but this is designed then once they're out on the road to help law enforcement. And we've done a lot of study on this decal. We partnered with the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia. And over the first couple of years of the decal, they did some research and found that it really made a difference, that it did help with compliance. And we saw that they felt that we probably had 3,000 less crashes involving teen drivers because of the decal. So let me wrap up. I'm going to wrap up and I'll hand it off to Bill in a minute. But I want to just end, if we can advance to the last slide, I want to talk for a minute about parent-teen driving agreements. And really, again, talk about the critical role parents play in terms of the success of graduated driver's license programs. There's been a lot of research done by CHOP, the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia, by Liberty Mutual Insurance and other groups to say that parents really are key, that they are the #1 driving teacher and coach, that they need to be actively engaged. And when they are, it makes a huge difference. So parent-teen driving agreements are simply an agreement that you and your teen work together on to say, hey, these are the things we agree to in order for you to have driving privileges. These are our household rules, but they also include your state's GDL laws. They should be in there. Those rules should be in there as well. So I want to really stress that when parents are actively engaged, when they have these parent-teen driving agreements and teens are aware of them, they know about it, they're enforced, it makes a good difference. So I like some of this data. I want to share it with you really quickly just to show you the impact you as parents can have. So teens who have involved and supportive parents are half as likely to crash, 71% less likely to drive impaired, and 30% less likely to use a phone when they're driving, and they're 50% more likely to buckle up every trip and understand how important it is. So it's important that you talk, that you engage with each other, that you have these rules in place. And I'll end by saying, I did this with my son. He's now 25, and I'm happy to say he's doing great. He's driving and successful. But we did this. We developed our parent-teen driving agreement. We put it on the refrigerator, front and center. So every time he got in that refrigerator, it was there. And the rules were clearly spelled out. It was succinct, very easy to understand. It talked about always asking for the keys. It reaffirmed the GDL requirements, putting gas in the car, calling for help, who to call in the event of an emergency, and so forth. And it stayed there for over 3 years. So he was well out of the GDL system. And the only reason it came down is because I had to buy a new refrigerator. So I encourage parents to really get engaged with your teen. Use GDL for all it's worth. And I'm gonna do a shameless plug for just a minute before I throw this off to Bill. So I had the pleasure of co-authoring this book. I think we can see it, called Not So Fast, with a colleague of mine, Tim Hollister, who's based in Connecticut. Unfortunately, Tim lost his son Reed in a car crash. And it talks about GDL, and it provides some really good information about your GDL laws and how to leverage them and a lot of other things. I don't make a cent off this. This goes to charity. So I encourage you to check it out. So Bill, I'm going to hand it off to you to keep the conversation going here.
Great job, Pam. Lots of very useful information. Thank you very much. And I'm honored to be here to share some thoughts about a couple of topics. If we can, there we go. So I'll be talking about conducting effective practice driving sessions with your teen, and then some tips on managing your teen's driving after they start to drive on their own. When it comes to practice driving, a lot of parents really aren't exactly sure where to start when it comes to coaching while riding shotgun next to their driver. And this slide here shows that, well, a lot of parents don't understand how important they are in shaping their teens' driving habits. Turns out you are the most important factor of all. In fact, teens rate parents over 2.5 times more important than a driving school, and that's the second most influential factor. So the bottom line is that your input and involvement is critical to your teens' development of safe driving habits. So hopefully these tips will be useful. And I'll start by talking about some tips for practice driving sessions, some things to do before you start driving, some things to do while you're during the sessions, and then some things to do after. So before each session, next slide, please. Don't just go driving. You want to plan every session. And that means determining where you're going and particularly how you're going to get there. The key here is to drive a variety of routes, not just the same route to the common destinations that we all go to, school, sports, grocery store, etc., but taking different routes to those destinations. A goal would be to never take the same route if that's possible. So that means it takes a little bit of planning on the front end, and you might have to leave a little bit earlier to take a different and perhaps somewhat less direct route. But our research at AAA through our AAA Foundation for Traffic Safety tells us that doing this is extremely valuable in coaching a safe teen driver to give them a wide variety of route experiences. Next slide, please. You also want to make sure that they drive in a wide variety of conditions. So nighttime and rain and snow, the works. You don't want the first time your teen drives in the rain to be when they are alone. And if your teen crashes, it's most likely going to be at night. So like Pam said, it's a high risk time of day. So by practicing at night, you can help keep that risk down as well. Next slide, please. Also, before you head on the road, you really want to make sure that both you and your teen really understand the technologies in your vehicle and how they work, whether it's lane keeping assist or adaptive cruise control or automatic emergency braking, whatever it is. You really want to crack open that owner's manual and dig into that technology. Each manufacturer's system can operate differently. So Mazda's system is going to be a little different from Buick, and Buick's is going to be a little different from Subaru. So you really need to know your vehicle, and that's a good mantra to have, is know thy vehicle. Next slide, please. You also want to make sure that you, to the degree possible, set any friction that's going on between parents and the teen, just to leave it outside the vehicle. And that can be tough because you're bringing your entire length of your relationship into the vehicle. Now, this will be mainly on you to manage. So if there's some sort of conflict going on between you and your teen, today might not be the best day to get in the car together. It might be better to postpone it in terms of what the teen would get out of that session, and they can stay focused on driving rather than on other stuff. All right, next slide, please. All right, so once you get going, once you start, you want to keep it low key as you get going. You want to start simple and kind of get warmed up, maybe sticking to neighborhood streets and then busier streets as your teen becomes more comfortable. Now, in terms of how to actually coach your teen, well, AAA has also researched this extensively. Many parents end up focusing on how their teen is controlling and manipulating the vehicle. For example, how they're turning and how they're braking. And it turns out that this is not actually the most effective thing parents can do behind the wheel. It's easy for parents to see those things, but it's probably a big mistake instead of doing what is more valuable. The reality is teens will pretty much get these things down, turning the vehicle, braking. They'll get those down pretty quickly. But AAA's research tells us that it is far more useful and effective for parents to instead focus on sharing their unique wisdom and experience. So some examples, parents should share these types of things, special techniques that they've developed and higher order approaches, if you will. Things like, let's look through the car ahead, not just at the car ahead, but through it to be able to see even further down the road. Hey, before you press the brake pedal to actually start slowing down, let's tap the brake pedal a couple of times first. That will flash the brake lights, and the human eye is attracted to motion. So if there's a distracted driver behind you, that flashing of your lights before you actually start slowing down might be enough to wake them up so they don't run into the back of your car. Also, strategies like, hey, let's stop well back from the vehicle ahead. You really don't want to get trapped, meaning you want to be able to drive around that vehicle ahead without you having to back up. Today, you never know what's going to happen. Somebody might get out of the car and approach your vehicle. You need to be able to get around that car and move along. Also, when turning, we should be looking through the turn to where your vehicle will be, not necessarily where it is now. These are just types of examples that go beyond, hey, you braked a little hard there, you turned a little bit early there, for example. Now, how to go about sharing these things? Instead of saying things like do this or do that, it's often better phrased as a personal tip from the parent. So for example, a parent might say to their teen, I find that if I can read the license plate of the vehicle ahead, I know I may be a little bit close to that vehicle. Or I've learned that when the light turns green, that tells me another vehicle might be about to run that red light. So I wait just an extra second or two before entering that intersection. Even though I can legally go, I wait to make sure it's truly clear. Also, when the light turns green, I know never to be the first vehicle to enter an intersection. You want to let somebody else go. I always use somebody else as a buffer. Even if you get hit, you want to be the second car hit, not the first car hit. Next slide, please. More advice might be, you know what I like to do is keep a huge donut of space around my vehicle. And yeah, that sounds kind of corny, but teens tend to like donuts, so maybe that's something memorable. You'd say, hey, I also even add even more space around my vehicle when I'm near vulnerable road users, such as pedestrians, bicyclists, and motorcycle riders. So be sure as parents to share whatever comes to your mind as you're driving these types of strategies. And it can help to kind of search back into your inventory of your best driving strategies that you've used over the years to stay out of trouble. And sharing these types of tips and rules of thumb and wisdom and personal experiences will make a much greater difference when your teen is actually driving on their own. Now, you don't want to go too long in practice sessions either, maybe about 25 minutes at most before you take a break. And when you do take a break, it's probably a good idea to ask the teen how they think they're doing. So before you start giving feedback, then ask how they're doing, because they may be able to recognize everything that you have in mind, and it's probably better for them to recognize that rather than just you providing them a list. Now, if your teen says, stop yelling at me when you're in the car, you're probably not yelling at them. That's probably not about what you are doing. It's probably rather how your teen is feeling. So that might be a sign to ease up, maybe move to a less busy road, or pull over and take a break. So it's probably them, not you. Also, resist fighting against some of the updated driving techniques that your teen has hopefully been taught in driver education. So, for example, holding the wheel at 10 and 2, nope, we don't do that anymore. You shouldn't either. Hand over hand steering, well, there are a couple other techniques that are just as valid, maybe even better. So it can be useful sometimes not to fight driver ed and realize that their driver education is a lot more current than yours was. Obviously, it's good to have the radio off. The reason why we like music is our brains process it, but we don't want a brand new teen driver to be using their brain power for anything but driving. So if they have some extra capacity, if you're on a long empty stretch of road or something, it's better to spend the time playing the what if game. So asking the teen questions. Well, what might that other driver's next move be? What if a tire blows out? What if a deer jumps into the road from the right side? What if that approaching driver doesn't see you and pulls out right in front of you? So one of the goals here is to help them develop strategies before they're actually presented with the actual need to take action. So you can help make the difference between your team being able to respond to an issue with a plan versus merely having to react to an emergency situation. And then last thing, while you're during the session, be sure to stay off your phone as well. So go ahead and put that on do not disturb mode. Your teams need your attention while you're on the road. All right, next slide, please. All right, after the session, it's a good time to start debriefing. And again, it's great to start with asking your teams questions like, how did it go? What went smoothly? What was more challenging? How do you think you improved over previous sessions? What would you do differently next time? And perhaps best, what do you think you should practice during our next session? Then you can give the feedback. If they miss some points, then that's a great time for you to share what you've noticed there. It's good also to schedule your next practice session and to log your progress. A lot of states require that families log a certain number of hours, and that's where, next slide please, a handy resource from AAA comes. We have a downloadable parent guide that you can use to log your progress there. That's the back side of the parent guide. Next slide. On the front side is some suggested do's and don'ts for conducting effective practice session. But wait, there's more. Next slide. There we go. We have 6 miniature lesson plans for you to use, including common situations to watch out for. Now, the goal is really, with this, is really provide a starting point for parents. It's sort of like a quick start guide. Say if you buy a new TV, you're going to get the 40-page owner's manual, but you're probably also going to get a very small quick start guide. Hey, the football game's coming on. I got to plug this TV and get it going right away. That's what this is really. It's probably not all you need to know, but it's hopefully enough to get you started. And it's free to download at this point. So there's the website you can go to get that. And this is made possible by our AAA members. So if you're a member, then thank you very much. All right. It is right for you to be concerned about your teen driving on their own. Next slide, please. Oh, there's a picture of the updated parent, AAA's parent-teen driving agreement. So I wanted to let you see that. That's available through that parent guide as well. Forgot to go through that slide. Okay, next slide, please. All right. So this is the only plot or chart or graph or diagram I have. And if somebody told me, Bill, you only have one slide or one image to show parents or teens, this would be it. This would be it. This shows the likelihood of crashing over time. And that dashed line in the middle running up and down marks the point where teens move from driving with the adult, with you in the car, to driving on their own. Now you can see that the likelihood of crashing is about the same between the red and the green lines. Experienced drivers, that's us, that's you. Very close, the teen drivers are very close there. Now, one click, please. Great, okay, so if we move to the point, future, in the next couple of months, we can see that the experienced drivers' risks, they'll go up. We're used to driving on our own. Our risk is low. One more click, let's see what happens to the teen drivers. Aha, okay, so their risk of crashing goes up 400%. You can see on the left, teens are learning how to drive safely, but on the right, they just choose not to in some cases when they're on their own. So they are going to drive differently than when you were aboard. So it's right to have these types of systems in place there. So as Pam mentioned, research shows us a huge value in families adopting a parent-teen driving agreement. Okay, last slide, please. All right, there's just one other real world factor related to safe teen driving that I'll share, and that is them getting enough sleep. Teens need 9 to 9.5 hours of sleep each night. That's not just time in bed, that's actual sleep for their bodies to grow normally. Driving risks, and as you can see, a whole bunch of other risks go way up if they get less sleep than that. More sleep means they're safer behind the wheel. So we recommend not overscheduling teens during the week or the weekend, and don't really expect them to be functional before 10 a.m. because they won't be. Teens, their circadian rhythms, their daily energy schedules are shifted compared to adults. So a teen getting up at 6 a.m. is like having an adult having to wake up at 4 a.m. And nobody likes to do that. We all know what we're like at 4 a.m. Oh. So teens are just going to be zombies until 10 a.m., even when they get enough sleep. But if they sleep more, they'll be safer drivers. Not only will they be less likely to fall asleep behind the wheel, but their perception will be better. They'll be able to detect hazards. They'll be able to make better decisions on the road. And they'll probably get a whole lot better grades as well. So at no point in life is sleep more important than adolescence. All right, last slide there. One more key takeaways. Plan your practice driving. Lots of different routes, lots of different driving conditions. Share your experiences, your wisdom, your judgment. Make sure they get enough sleep and adopt a parent-teen driving agreement. So back to you all.
Great. Pam, Bill, those were both excellent presentations, really informative, I thought. And I just want to let our audience know that you do have the opportunity to ask questions in the chat if you do have a question for our panelists, and we'll try to get through a few of them. I do have one question from an audience member that's asking about a situation that's increasingly common these days, which is teens delaying licensure. They don't want to get licensed 16, 17 with all these restrictions, and maybe they're just not interested. They'd rather wait till 19. A good thing because they're maybe a little more mature? Is that a bad thing because they don't have those GDL restrictions that you mentioned, Pam? How should parents approach a situation like that?
Well, you should never force your child to do something that they don't feel they want to do or necessarily are ready to do. I mean, that's the worst thing. And I've had parents approach me at orientation sessions in my state saying, I don't know what to do. I can't get my child interested. Well, they're not ready for that. They clearly have demonstrated they don't have the maturity or the desire. But I think it's really important for people to understand that really we've heard this, well, maybe it's because of the GDL restrictions, and they've done a lot of research on them, and that's really not the case. Most teens, when they say they don't want to drive, they either feel that they don't need to because they have other ways to get around, and we have a very connected society in this day and age, or they're not comfortable. They don't want to. There's also economic issues as well, especially we saw this back in 2008 when we had the last recession where families just couldn't afford to have a teen on the road. You see insurance rates go up, there's gas, there's maintenance on vehicles. So there's a lot of factors at play here, but we've definitely seen the numbers go down. I don't think it's terrible by any stretch of the imagination. We know with the brain development issues, the longer we can get folks to wait, the better. So we should never force or push our kids into doing these things. But I also want to say to parents, if your teen ages out of graduated driver's licensing in your state, and New Jersey is the one exception where that won't happen, we require all new drivers under 21 to go through the full GDL program, and after 21, they still have to go through a shortened version of GDL. But we encourage parents to think about how can they institute their own form of GDL to help their teen, get that experience in as less risky situations, if you will. Practice with them, institute, a permit phase, institute a licensure, an independent licensure base with some of those restrictions. I can't overstate that. I mean, the research is very clear. GDL works. It is the best tool we have. And for parents, it really gives them the guidance they're looking for to help their teens. So I don't see it as a bad thing, but I think there are things parents can do to supplement it when their teens do get ready to start driving. And Bill, you probably have some thoughts as well.
I think you covered it well. Really, parents are the original and baseline graduated driver's licensing system. So regardless of what the state says, the parent is ultimately the best judge of when someone's ready and to best person to put controls in there, regardless of what the state says.
Absolutely.
And I guess by that same token, when you're looking at the 16 or 17-year-old drivers and you're trying to set those additional limits, you know, it's not just about the GDL restrictions; those are the minimums. You know, this is maybe a question that's really individual, but how do you know when your child is ready to move on to that next stage? You know, in your opinion as a parent.
I mean, I think you just have to really sit down and think about, you know, your child's maturity level. And again, thinking about, you know, their personalities. Are they risk adverse? Are they, you know, they more likely to succumb to peer pressure? I mean, you got to think about your child, and you've been rearing this child for the, 16 years. So you have a pretty good sense of where they're coming from. So I think you have to really gauge those kinds of things, and you just have to stay actively involved. I think that's what's so darn important. I can't overstate parental involvement in this process. It's huge. It really is. And the research is clear, and Bill shared it with you as well. I mean, parents are the #1 teacher and coach, and they're the biggest influencer on their teenagers. While parents may think their teens are rolling their eyes and saying, oh yeah, sure, mom, whatever, they're listening. They are absolutely listening. So we have influence, we have power, and we need to use it to help our teens through this process.
And we have an audience member who actually says, you know, her son said that he didn't feel responsible enough when he was 16 years old. Her son said that, which ironically is actually a very responsible thing to say.
Very mature.
To recognize that. But I want to take a little prerogative if I can, and we'll time travel back to 2006 when I was learning to drive, and you're playing the role of my mother in this situation. Now, I'm a good kid. I generally have a good relationship with my mother, and we're driving, and I'm in a pretty boring suburban neighborhood, and I'm probably driving a little too close to the right. And she says, Alec, I think you're driving a little too close to the right. And I say, like a wise guy, well, did I hit the car? Then I'm not driving too close to the right. So this is kind of like a crisis in the middle of the practice session. And I'm curious, Bill, because this probably is something that comes up for parents frequently. You know, how do you handle something like that?
Yeah, that can be tricky. If you've got a teen that's maybe fighting back a little bit or taking some risks and trying to kind of ride the edge there, that may be time to discontinue that session, because driving is one of the first real adult responsibilities the teens have. So they do need to take it seriously. And if they're giving off vibes or evidence that, hey, this is no big deal, they may not really fully understand quite yet how significant this might be, how liable they are, but how liable they are putting their parents in a liable situation as well. It's not just the teen, and if the teen crashes, everybody's involved, not just the teen there. So they need to be taking it very seriously. If they're not, then perhaps a little pause there might be appropriate.
Yeah, I remember having my son behind the wheel, and I was his primary coach. He preferred me over his dad. He said his dad barked at him too many times. But, you know, imagine also, you know, he was my kid and dealing with safety mom here. But I remember him saying repeatedly in the beginning, I know, mom, when I would offer advice. And I'm like, no, you don't know. You've never done this before. And all of a sudden it kind of like hit him. He's like, yeah, I guess I haven't. And I'm like, no, you haven't. So, you know, never lost my cool, but, you know, we have to kind of remind our teens sometimes. And at one point I had my son pull over because he was really pushing back. And I said, you know, would you think about me as your driving coach? I'm your driving coach. So he was a hockey player, and I'm like, so when your coach tells you on the ice to do certain things, you listen, right? He goes, well, of course. And I said, well, I'm that role for you now behind the wheel. And it really helped to kind of get everybody to take a deep breath and take a step back. And I think he had a better appreciation for what I was trying to do. I was his coach, trying to help him, trying to get better.
Yeah, that's a nice distinction. the difference between an instructor and a coach, and the parent's role really is to be that coach, because the parent's going to spend a lot more time with the teen in a driving situation than a driving instructor would. That might be 5, 6, 7 hours, but you'll spend dozens and dozens of hours there. So coach is good, and sometimes there may be some challenges there, because at age 15 is not when kids start to learn to drive. They've been learning to drive since age 5, and who have they been watching? You. So there might be 10 years of bad habits there that they may go, well, you do this all the time, so I can do it. There could be some challenges like there that, now's not a bad time to become a better model driver as a parent. So even when you're driving, they're still watching. They're learning from you as well.
I said this many, many times to parents, and I've written about it and said, be the driver you want your teen to be, because they mimic your behavior. That's how we learn, and they will do things. So if you have a tendency to grab your cell phone, Bill mentioned before about, put your cell phone away when you're out there in your coaching role and be 100% engaged with your teen, but it applies when you're behind the wheel. Buckle up every trip, put your cell phone away, think about, the speed and what you're driving. Think about your behaviors and how you interact with other drivers out there on the road. If you are very verbal and you're sharing your anger or frustration with other drivers, there's a good bet, your teen's been absorbing this. I say they absorb it from early ages, and they will probably mimic your behavior. So be the driver you want your teen to be, which is responsible and safe and focused on the road.
Nice.
Well, that's a great way to close it out. I know we went a couple minutes over time, but I appreciate it. And I think it's also fitting, because when we do education to high school students, we're talking about them being safe drivers and safe passengers. And we're also telling them, hey, if your mom or your dad is not buckling up, or is, talking on the cell phone, or is texting, you should tell them to knock it off. The little reversal of the relationship.
Call them out, absolutely.
Yeah.
You bet.
And so I think the point of setting those habits for yourself, and I mean, look, the same habits that are going to keep the teens safe are going to keep you safe as a driver. So it's all the same safe practices.
Very true.
But Bill, Pam, this was phenomenal. I really appreciate your time this afternoon. I'm sure the audience does as well. And thanks to all the folks who attended. We are going to record this and we'll make it available. So if you have relatives, friends, colleagues who you think might benefit from this, please feel free to share. And we hope to see you next week when we're going to continue the series. You mentioned drowsiness, which we're doing in a few weeks. Next week, same time, Tuesday, 4 p.m., we'll have a little presentation about distraction, and then we'll continue in this series with impairment, drowsiness, driving with the children with ADHD, and then finally hearing from teens themselves, which should be a fun one. So we hope you'll join us for all those, and very much appreciate your time today, Bill and Pam. Thanks so much, and have a good day, everyone.
Thanks for having me.
Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye now. Take care, everyone. Be safe.